What if you could stay calm and think clearly no matter how intense the pressure gets? Your brain is wired to react, but what if you could rewire it to respond instead? Pressure doesn't have to control you. Here's how to take back control of your emotions and mind. In moments of high pressure, most people think their reactions are a matter of willpower or personality, but the truth runs far deeper. It's written into the biology of your nervous system. When the body perceives a threat, whether it's physical danger, an emotional confrontation, or a critical decision under tight deadlines, it triggers an ancient survival mechanism known as the fight or flight response. This is not a conscious choice. It's an automatic sequence orchestrated by the limbic system, particularly the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm center. The amygdala's role is to detect anything it perceives as a threat, even if it's just a tone of voice, a facial expression, or a thought about the future. Once it sounds the alarm, it sends rapid, fire signals to the hypothalamus, which then activates the sympathetic nervous system. In less than a second, adrenaline and noradrenaline surge into your bloodstream, elevating heart rate, constricting blood vessels, and mobilizing glucose reserves to fuel your muscles. Cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, follows shortly after, keeping you alert and ready for action. This is a brilliant system when you're running from a predator, but in a modern context, when your predator is a critical meeting, a disagreement with a colleague, or the pressure of delivering results, this same system can work against you. When adrenaline floods the system, blood flow is redirected away from the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logical thinking, planning, and emotional regulation, toward the primal centers that prioritize survival. This means that under pressure, you are biologically predisposed to react impulsively rather than respond thoughtfully. In this state, perception narrows. You become hyper, focused on the immediate threat, which can make small problems seem larger and complex situations appear overwhelming. The brain's pattern recognition system starts looking for evidence to confirm danger, which can distort your judgment. The subtle shift from balanced awareness to threat-based thinking is the essence of emotional hijacking. Once you're in it, logic struggles to break through because your physiology is actively working to prioritize speed over accuracy, reaction over reflection. What many don't realize is that emotional hijacking isn't just about what's happening now. It's also heavily influenced by the past. The amygdala stores emotional memories, especially those tied to fear, embarrassment, or shame. This means your current reaction could be amplified by echoes of unresolved experiences. For example, if in the past you were criticized harshly in a public setting, the body can carry that memory as a template for danger. When something in the present resembles that old moment, the amygdala doesn't differentiate between then and now. It responds as if the threat is identical, flooding your system with the same chemical cocktail. This is why two people can face the same high pressure situation and respond in completely different ways. It's not simply about personality. It's about the way their nervous systems have been conditioned by past events, beliefs, and learned emotional patterns. Over time, repeated exposure to stress without conscious regulation can wire the brain to expect pressure and react with a low threshold for activation. In other words, the more you get emotionally hijacked without awareness, the more likely it becomes your default setting. There's another layer to this biology that's important to understand: the role of the autonomic nervous system's two primary branches, the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. The sympathetic system is the accelerator, driving the fight or flight response. The parasympathetic system is the brake, responsible for rest, digestion, and recovery. Under chronic stress, the accelerator gets stuck, and the brake becomes weak from lack of use. When that happens, even minor triggers can send you into a state of overdrive, making clear thinking almost impossible. The problem isn't that the stress response exists, it's that in modern life, it's activated far more often than necessary. The body evolved to handle short bursts of intense stress followed by periods of recovery, but today's lifestyle often traps people in prolonged states of low to moderate stress without sufficient reset. This continuous activation keeps cortisol levels elevated, which over time can damage neurons in the hippocampus, the brain's memory and learning center, and impair the prefrontal cortex's ability to regulate emotions. This is why prolonged stress doesn't just make you feel overwhelmed. It literally changes the structure and function of your brain. When under pressure, this shift in biology can lead to decision making that feels urgent but is often clouded. The reactive mind becomes obsessed with immediate relief, saying whatever will end the conflict, making the fastest choice, or avoiding the situation entirely, rather than focusing on what will produce the best long-term outcome. This explains why people often regret the things they say or do in moments of pressure. Their biology was set to survive, not to strategize. It's also essential to acknowledge the role of the body in sustaining this state. Once the stress response is triggered, physical sensations, racing heart, tight chest, shallow breathing, send feedback to the brain, reinforcing the perception that danger is present. This feedback loop between body and brain means that the more your body reacts, the more your mind believes there's something to fear, creating a self-perpetuating cycle. Without intervention, this loop can sustain the stress response far longer than the original trigger warranted. The good news is that by understanding the mechanics of this process, you can begin to recognize the early signs of emotional hijacking before it fully takes over. Awareness is the first step toward breaking the automatic cycle. When you catch yourself in the initial stages, your breathing shifts, your shoulders tense, your thoughts narrow. You have a brief window to change the trajectory before the chemicals flood your system entirely. This is where emotional control begins, not in suppressing feelings, but in intercepting the body's momentum before it locks you into reactive mode. In the landscape of human experience, the difference between reacting and responding is subtle but profoundly transformative. Reaction is often automatic, impulsive, and driven by conditioned emotional patterns rooted deep within the brain's survival centers. Response, on the other hand, is intentional, reflective, and aligned with a higher level of awareness, one that emerges when we learn to create space between stimulus and action. This space is where freedom resides, the space where you reclaim control over your emotional life and think clearly, even in the most intense pressure situations. To understand how to shift from reaction to response, it is essential to grasp the mechanics of the mind-body connection. When you encounter a triggering event, the brain's amygdala instantly assesses the threat level and mobilizes a cascade of physiological changes designed to protect you. This is reaction, the body acting first without waiting for conscious approval. But what if, instead of surrendering to this biological imperative, you trained your nervous system to pause, to observe, and then to choose? This pause, although it may seem infinitesimally brief, is the gateway to response. The foundation of this pause is mindfulness, a state of focused awareness in the present moment. Mindfulness is not about suppressing emotions or denying their existence. It is about witnessing them with curiosity and without judgment. When you cultivate this practice, you begin to notice the subtle physical sensations and thoughts that precede an emotional outburst. The tightening in your chest, the quickening of your breath, the rush of heat across your face, these are all early signals from your body, alerting you to the rising storm within. Recognizing these signs as they emerge gives you the opportunity to intervene. Intervention requires creating mental space, a brief but powerful moment where you shift from being the passenger to becoming the driver of your internal experience. This space can be cultivated through simple, intentional acts. For instance, bringing your attention to the breath is one of the most accessible ways to anchor yourself in the present and soften the grip of reactive impulses. By slowing and deepening your breath, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which calms the body and restores balance. This physiological shift sends a message to the brain that the immediate threat has passed, allowing the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thought, to re-engage. The prefrontal cortex is the brain's executive center, responsible for decision making, impulse control, and emotional regulation. When the amygdala is in control, the prefrontal cortex is effectively sidelined. But when you cultivate the ability to pause and breathe, you signal to your brain that you can handle the situation with composure. This re-engagement of the higher brain functions is the essence of response. It allows you to consider options, weigh consequences, and choose actions aligned with your values and long-term goals rather than fleeting emotional urges. It is important to understand that this shift is not a one-time event, but a skill that requires consistent practice. The brain's plasticity means that neural pathways are constantly being rewired based on experience. When you repeatedly interrupt reactive patterns with mindful pauses, you strengthen the circuits that support emotional regulation and weaken those that fuel impulsivity. Over time, what once required conscious effort becomes an automatic way of being, a new default mode where response replaces reaction even in the heat of pressure. One of the most powerful tools for developing this skill is self-observation without criticism. When you notice yourself reacting, whether it's snapping at a colleague, feeling overwhelmed by anxiety, or spiraling into self-doubt, resist the urge to berate yourself. Judgment only fuels stress and reinforces the fight or flight response. Instead, approach your experience as data, a signal from your nervous system that something within you is activated. This gentle curiosity opens the door to transformation because it reduces resistance and invites insight. Another element critical to shifting from reaction to response is recognizing the role of habitual thought patterns. Our minds tend to dwell on past hurts or future worries, creating loops of anxiety and fear that hijack emotional regulation. These loops function like grooves worn into the brain by repeated firing of the same neural pathways. Breaking free requires interrupting these loops through conscious redirection of attention. Practices such as focused meditation, journaling, or even simple mental affirmations can help retrain your mind to anchor in the present and prioritize constructive thoughts. The language you use internally also shapes your ability to respond rather than react. When you catch yourself saying, "I can't handle this," or "this is too much," you are programming your brain to expect overwhelm. Conversely, reframing your inner dialogue to affirm capability and calmness, "I can navigate this situation with clarity," or "I choose how I respond," activates a different set of neural circuits that support resilience. This subtle but profound shift in self-talk is a cornerstone of emotional mastery. In practical terms, shifting from reaction to response means that when you encounter a stressful situation, whether it's a heated conversation, a looming deadline, or a sudden unexpected challenge, you take a moment to check in with your internal state. Notice your breath, acknowledge the emotions without getting lost in them, and remind yourself that you have the power to choose your next action. This moment of conscious choice changes everything because it moves you out of automaticity and into intentionality. It's also useful to cultivate what might be called a response ritual, a sequence of internal cues or physical actions that signal to your nervous system that you are shifting gears. This could be as simple as placing your hand over your heart, taking 3 intentional breaths, or silently counting to 5. These rituals act as anchors, grounding you in the present and disrupting the momentum of reactivity. With repetition, they become powerful tools for maintaining clarity under pressure. Ultimately, the journey from reaction to response is a journey inward, deepening relationship with yourself. It requires patience, compassion, and dedication. But with each mindful pause and each choice made from clarity rather than impulse, you reclaim your power. You create new pathways in the brain that support calm, deliberate action. You rewrite the story of how you handle pressure, transforming moments that once overwhelmed you into opportunities for growth and mastery. Breath is one of the most powerful tools at your disposal for regulating your emotional state and clearing your mind under pressure. Yet it is often overlooked because it happens naturally without conscious effort. The way you breathe in moments of stress or intense emotion is deeply connected to the functioning of your nervous system and brain. By learning to control your breath, you can actively influence your physiology, calming the body and creating clarity in the mind even in the midst of chaos. When you experience pressure, your breath becomes shallow, rapid, and erratic, an unconscious response tied to the fight or flight activation of the sympathetic nervous system. This kind of breathing sends signals to your brain that reinforce the perception of threat, increasing adrenaline and cortisol production and further ramping up the stress response. The cycle becomes self-perpetuating. The more stressed you feel, the more your breath quickens. The more your breath quickens, the more stress chemicals flood your body. Understanding this feedback loop is the first step toward taking control. The parasympathetic nervous system, often referred to as the rest and digest, a branch of your autonomic nervous system, acts as the natural counterbalance to the stress response. When activated, it slows heart rate, reduces blood pressure, and promotes relaxation and digestion. The key to regulating your emotional state is learning to stimulate this system on demand, and breath control is the gateway. Slow, deep, and rhythmic breathing techniques have been shown in neuroscience research to activate the vagus nerve, the primary nerve of the parasympathetic system. This activation sends calming signals to the brain, reducing the activity of the amygdala and allowing the prefrontal cortex to regain control. This means that with intentional breath control, you can literally change the chemistry of your brain in real time, moving from a reactive emotional state into one of calm and clarity. A particularly effective practice is coherent breathing, which involves breathing at a steady rate of approximately 5 breaths per minute. This rhythm optimizes the balance between the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems, creating a state of physiological coherence. In this state, heart rate variability, a measure of the variation in time between heartbeats, increases, which is a strong indicator of resilience and emotional regulation. Heart coherence occurs when your heart rhythm becomes orderly and harmonious with your breathing. This coherence can be cultivated through focused breathing combined with positive emotional focus, such as gratitude or compassion. When your heart and breath are in sync, your nervous system shifts into a balanced state that supports clear thinking and emotional stability. The electrical signals generated by the heart influence brain function, meaning the heart actually plays a critical role in emotional processing and cognitive clarity. To cultivate this state, a simple but powerful exercise involves focusing your attention on the area around your heart, imagining your breath flowing in and out of this center, and cultivating a feeling of appreciation or kindness. As you do this, slow your breath down to a steady rhythm, lengthening both your inhales and exhales. This practice creates a feedback loop between your heart, brain, and breath that encourages coherence and calm. Not only does this technique help regulate immediate emotional responses, but it also builds resilience over time. When practiced regularly, it trains your nervous system to return to coherence more quickly during stressful situations. Your body learns that calmness is the default, not chaos, which reduces the likelihood of emotional hijacking. It rewires the brain's response patterns and strengthens the neural circuits responsible for emotional regulation and clarity. Breath control also impacts oxygen and carbon dioxide levels in the blood, which can alter brain wave activity. Slow breathing tends to increase alpha and theta brain waves associated with relaxed, focused states and enhanced creativity. These brainwave states foster clarity of thought and problem-solving abilities, which are essential when you need to think clearly under pressure. By contrast, shallow, rapid breathing elevates beta brainwaves linked with anxiety and scattered thinking. In practical terms, this means that learning to manage your breath gives you direct access to changing your mental state. Before a high-pressure presentation, during a tense negotiation, or in a sudden crisis, taking a few minutes to engage in conscious, coherent breathing can reset your nervous system. It moves you out of the reactive mode and into a space where you can access insight, innovation, and calm decision-making. Beyond the individual benefits, the practice of heart coherence and breath regulation also influences social interactions. When you maintain coherence, your body emits electromagnetic signals that others can subconsciously sense. This can create a more harmonious atmosphere in conversations and collaborations, helping to reduce conflict and foster connection. In this way, breath and heart coherence do not just support your internal state, they ripple out to influence the environment around you. Mastery of breath and heart coherence is not about forcing control, but about inviting a natural flow. It is a practice of tuning into your body, listening deeply, and responding with intention rather than reaction. The more you practice, the more automatic this regulation becomes, allowing you to maintain emotional balance and clear thinking as your baseline, even when external pressures mount. The human mind is wired to operate on habitual patterns, thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that have been repeated so many times they become the default operating system running in the background of your consciousness. These default settings are not inherently fixed. They are the result of repeated neural activity, shaped by past experiences, conditioning, and environmental influences. In the context of managing emotions and thinking clearly under pressure, reprogramming these default mental patterns is essential because often the mind defaults to fear, anxiety, or reactivity that clouds judgment and hijacks emotional regulation. Neuroscience has revealed that the brain is remarkably plastic, capable of reorganizing itself throughout life. This neuroplasticity means that the patterns you have lived by until now, whether they have served you or not, can be reshaped and restructured. This process starts with awareness, but it requires intentional effort and consistent practice. Reprogramming the mind's default settings involves interrupting old, unconscious patterns and replacing them with new, conscious ones that align with emotional mastery and clear thinking. One of the core elements in this process is identifying the repetitive thought-emotion cycles that create your emotional personality. These cycles often function like grooves carved into your neural pathways where the same thoughts trigger familiar emotional reaction. For example, if under pressure you habitually think, "I'm not good enough," or "this will never work," these thoughts generate fear and anxiety, reinforcing your brain's default to reactivity. Over time, this feedback loop not only affects your emotional state, but also shapes your physical nervous system to expect and react to stress, locking you into a reactive mode. The first step in reprogramming is to become the observer of these patterns rather than the automatic participant. This means developing meta-awareness, watching your thoughts and emotions as they arise without immediate judgment or identification. With this perspective, you can begin to see how your mind creates reality through habitual interpretation. You start to recognize when your brain is running old scripts that do not serve your highest interest. Visualization is a powerful technique to install new neural patterns. By vividly imagining yourself responding calmly and clearly in high-pressure situations, you create new experiential memories in the brain. The brain does not fully differentiate between actual experience and detailed mental rehearsal. Therefore, consistent visualization rewires your neural circuits. This mental rehearsal acts like a blueprint for your brain, teaching it a new way to operate under pressure. When you visualize, it's important to engage all your senses and emotions as if the scenario is happening now. See the environment clearly, hear the sounds, feel the sensations in your body, and most importantly, cultivate the feelings of calmness and clarity you want to embody. This practice shifts your emotional baseline and reinforces the neural pathways of response rather than reaction. Another aspect of reprogramming involves changing your internal dialogue. The words you tell yourself shape your emotional and cognitive state. If your self-talk is dominated by fear-based language, it reinforces the survival-focused brain. Replacing these scripts with affirmations of strength, composure, and control reconditions the brain's default expectations. Statements like, "I am capable of handling this," or "I choose peace in the midst of chaos," serve as mental anchors that guide your nervous system toward calmness. Emotional rehearsal is also a critical piece of this puzzle. This goes beyond visualizing calmness. It involves intentionally experiencing and holding positive emotional states such as gratitude, joy, or confidence in your mind and body. Neuroscience shows that emotions create chemical signatures that affect brain function and plasticity. By practicing emotional states aligned with mastery and clarity, you create a neurological environment that supports these qualities as your new default. Over time, these practices cultivate what could be called a new emotional personality, a habitual state of being that predisposes you to respond rather than react, to think clearly rather than be overwhelmed. The nervous system learns to expect calmness, and the brain rewires itself to support higher cognitive function, even in challenging circumstances. This reprogramming is not a quick fix, but a gradual unfolding. Each time you consciously choose new mental and emotional patterns, you strengthen the pathways that support them. The brain's capacity for change means that what once felt like an automatic reaction can evolve into a conscious, empowered response. It is also important to cultivate an environment that supports this transformation. This includes surrounding yourself with influences, whether people, media, or experiences, that reinforce calmness and clarity rather than stress and distraction. The brain is influenced by its context, and the more your environment reflects your desired mental state, the easier it becomes to maintain new default patterns. In this process, patience and self-compassion are essential. The mind will resist change. Old habits feel familiar and safe, even if they cause pain or limitation. Recognizing that rewiring the brain requires time helps you stay committed through inevitable setbacks and fluctuation. Ultimately, reprogramming your mind's default settings is about taking back ownership of your internal world. It is about moving from unconscious reaction to conscious creation, designing a mental and emotional landscape that empowers you to navigate pressure with clarity and grace. This transformation rewires not only how you think and feel in the moment, but reshapes your very identity, allowing you to become the person you choose to be rather than the one shaped by past conditioning. The process of mastering your emotions and thinking clearly under pressure culminates in the creation of a new emotional baseline, a stable internal state that becomes your natural default regardless of external circumstances. This baseline is not simply about suppressing emotions or achieving temporary calm. It is about fundamentally retraining your nervous system to operate from a place of resilience, clarity, and intentionality. Establishing this new baseline rewires your body and mind so that calmness, focus, and emotional balance become your habitual state, even amidst the inevitable challenges life presents. Your emotional baseline is essentially the tone your nervous system holds most of the time. When the baseline is dominated by stress, anxiety, or reactivity, even minor triggers can provoke disproportionate responses. This is because your body remains on high alert, wired to expect danger and respond defensively. Shifting this baseline requires intentional work to gradually recalibrate your nervous system so it no longer defaults to survival mode, but instead resides in a state of equilibrium and openness. A key factor in this transformation is the consistent practice of mental conditioning techniques that focus on positive emotional states. Emotions like gratitude, appreciation, compassion, and love create a powerful neurochemical environment that supports healing and growth. When you intentionally cultivate these feelings, you flood your brain with neurotransmitters such as dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, which promote well-being and resilience. These chemicals serve not only to improve mood, but also to protect the brain from the damaging effects of chronic stress. The practice of gratitude, in particular, has profound effects on the nervous system. When you focus on what you appreciate, the brain shifts its focus away from threat and scarcity toward abundance and possibility. This shift changes the brain's neural activity patterns, moving away from the survival circuits of the amygdala and toward the reward and executive centers of the prefrontal cortex. As this pattern strengthens with repetition, gratitude becomes a doorway to a calmer, clearer state of mind that serves as the new baseline. Intention is another critical component in establishing a new emotional baseline. It involves consciously deciding how you want to feel and what you want to experience, rather than being passively swept along by unconscious impulses. Setting an intention each day to embody calmness, clarity, or resilience creates a mental framework that guides your thoughts, emotions, and actions. This process primes your nervous system to respond in alignment with your chosen state rather than defaulting to reactivity. Daily mental conditioning can take many forms, such as meditation, visualization, affirmations, or journaling. The power of these practices lies in their ability to create new neural pathways through repetition. When you consistently rehearse the experience of calm and clarity in your mind, you train your nervous system to recognize this as the norm. Over time, this results in the restructuring of your brain's default activity, reducing the intensity and frequency of stress responses. The concept of neuroplasticity is fundamental here. Your brain is not static, but continuously adapting to the input it receives. By feeding your brain with experiences and emotions that support your desired state, you actively reshape its architecture. This reshaping includes increasing connectivity between the prefrontal cortex and the limbic system, enhancing your capacity for emotional regulation and thoughtful decision-making. Creating a new emotional baseline also involves learning to let go of old emotional baggage and limiting beliefs that anchor you in past stress patterns. Holding on to unresolved emotions or negative narratives maintains the nervous system in a heightened state of alertness. Through practices such as mindful awareness, emotional release techniques, or therapeutic methods, you can begin to clear these residues, freeing your system to settle into a more balanced state. It's important to understand that this process is gradual. The nervous system, having been conditioned for years or decades to respond in certain ways, requires time to adapt to new patterns. Consistency is crucial because every moment you return to calmness and clarity reinforces the new baseline, while moments of stress and reactivity can reinforce the old one. Therefore, the journey toward mastery involves patience and compassion for yourself as you navigate progress and setbacks. In addition to internal work, your external environment plays a significant role in supporting or undermining your new emotional baseline. Surrounding yourself with people who embody calmness and clarity, reducing exposure to chronic stressors, and creating spaces that promote relaxation can amplify your ability to maintain emotional balance. The brain and nervous system are highly sensitive to environmental cues, so a supportive context makes the internal transformation more sustainable. Another powerful factor in creating this new baseline is the integration of body-centered practices. Movement, physical exercise, yoga, and somatic techniques help regulate the nervous system by releasing stored tension and promoting parasympathetic activation. When the body is calm and well regulated, the mind naturally follows, reinforcing the stability of your emotional baseline. As your baseline shifts, you begin to notice changes in how you experience pressure and challenges. Instead of feeling overwhelmed or hijacked by emotions, you find yourself accessing clarity and composure more readily. Your decisions become less reactive and more aligned with your values and goals. You respond to stress with greater resilience, and your capacity to maintain focus and presence expands. This new emotional baseline becomes a foundation from which you can create, grow, and thrive. It empowers you to navigate complexity without losing yourself, to engage with life fully rather than retreating into defense. As your nervous system adapts, you embody a new way of being, one marked by calm strength, mental clarity, and emotional mastery. In understanding how to control your emotions and think clearly under pressure, we uncover a profound truth. Mastery over our internal world is not a matter of chance, but of conscious choice and deliberate practice. From recognizing the biology of stress and emotional hijacking, to shifting from automatic reactions to mindful responses, each step empowers us to reclaim control over our mental and emotional states. By harnessing the power of breath and cultivating heart coherence, we tap into an innate mechanism that calms the nervous system and restores clarity. Through reprogramming our mind's default settings, we reshape the neural pathways that dictate our habitual reactions, allowing us to step into new patterns of resilience and calm. Finally, by creating a new emotional baseline, we anchor ourselves in a state of balance and intentionality that becomes the foundation for navigating life's pressures with grace. This journey is a testament to the incredible capacity within each of us to transform our experience from chaos to clarity, reaction to response, and overwhelm to empowerment.